Getting started with Google Docs. Before we begin diving into Google Docs, I want to just take a moment and pause and think about what Google Docs really represents and what the word processor really represents. Now, I don't know when you first used a word processor. If we take a look back in the kind of the history or the timeline of word processors, 1978, Apple Writer and Easy Writer were released for the Apple II. A lot of you may have started with it back then. WordStar in 1979. Can you believe we're talking about this long ago? Lotus 1, 2, 3, and 82, as was WordPerfect. It launched in 1982, which is where a lot of us got our start. Or Microsoft Word, which for DOS was announced in 1983 and released for Macintosh in 85. And finally, in 1989, the kind of the last big thing was Microsoft Word for Windows was released. Now, I just want to give you a quick perspective. In 1979, WordStar cost to get it, a version of WordStar, which was be like for CPM, it would be a very code-based word processor, was $495 in 1979 US dollars, plus $45 $40 for the manual. And even in 1989, Microsoft Word for Windows was $495. Now, if you take that and you extrapolate it into today's, or you kind of bring it forward into today's dollars, it works out to, what is it? I've got it here, just a minute. It works out to $495, accounting for inflation and etc., would be nearly $1,200 that we were willing to pay for a basic word processor. It didn't have anywhere near the features that we have today. So, I mean, if you can think about the fact that Google gives Google Docs away for free, a part of the Office suite, and we used to pay $495 just for the ability to be able to have basically an electronic typewriter on our computer that we could edit and that we could save documents in. It shows, I mean, it's still just incredible value. It's still just incredible value. And I think we have to just kind of take a step back and appreciate it. Now, thinking back to the days when you started with the word processor as well, I think one of the things philosophically that we have to kind of come to terms with, other than recognizing there's still value, even though it's free, one of the things we have to come to terms with is when we created documents in the past, they were primarily for print. It was a glorified typewriter in a lot of cases, but all of the documents that we created were primarily for print. So the tools that were built into the word processor were skewed and geared towards the print world, towards printing a document off. Today, the minority of documents are designed to be printed. They're designed to be read on screens or to be posted into websites. So we have a lot more of electronic and digital delivery of documents than we ever had before. A darn good place to start looking at the overall interface of Google Docs, because I want you to start thinking about Google Docs, about your word processor now as a digital tool as opposed to a tool that's designed for paper. And just recently in February, I think Google changed one, and I think this slipped by a lot of people, but I think it's a really profound change. When you go, this is the Google Docs interface, and we'll be talking about it. We have a sidebar here where we have our outline. We have our main text entry area where we enter all of our copy and all of our text. And we have our menu bar along the top, toolbar first of all, and then a menu bar that's embedded inside of the inside of the browser. So it's not, all of the menus are not up in the operating system menu bar as they are when you say run a version of Microsoft Word that's on your computer. But when you're running a web version of a word processor, all of your menus are windowed inside of your browser window. So that's something to recognize right off the top. But what I want to show you before we begin looking at the different features and how you kind of start the best ways to use Google Docs is under the file menu. If we go under the page setup, there's a brand new option that was only here from February. And I don't know if Microsoft Word has this or has had it for a while, but it's new to us in Google Docs. And this is the classic page setup where you have it set for pages and you have margins that you set and you choose the paper size that it's going to be output on. And this is that paper-based legacy. But we now have this pageless option where the document is now going to be all of those margins and those limitations of print margins and pages are going to be removed. And this is the interface that a lot of us are now choosing to write in because it's pageless. We don't have the page breaks. We don't have page numbering. So there are some formatting features that are removed from this version, but it allows us to have a much cleaner workspace as we write our document. And it's better designed for taking this document and then say publishing it to a web page or publishing it into a blog post. So that's I think a big change and something that you want to play with going back and forth. You do things like you lose tab stops when you're in page list. There's no tab stops, there's no page numbering. So your organization and your structure of your pages is somewhat different. So let's begin with taking a look at the interface again, just briefly. I think most of you are very comfortable with the overall design of a word processor. We have our drop-down menus with our main commands. We have a toolbar, which is quick access to formatting controls and a little bit of page layout control. And then we've got, of course, the area where we edit edit our text, where we type into. And if we take a look and kind of browse around the fringes of Google Docs, over on the left-hand side here, we see that we have different modes that we can be working in. And this is comes into play when we start talking about using Google Docs for collaborative work, where we're working with somebody else to make sure that we're in the right state, that we're in where we're editing the document, or we're making suggestions on somebody else's document, or we're just viewing a document. So you have those broad controls. And on the left-hand side here, this is really important. This little sidebar down the left-hand side is something that I believe a lot of us that come from a kind of a paper-based word processing environment don't pay enough attention to and don't take advantage of enough. So we'll be talking about that in a few moments. But before we go into those details, there's a pleasant surprise from Google. And I poo-poo Google a lot about how much support they give for different products. But if we go under the help menu, if you go there, you'll find Google Docs Help, which is a great place if you have a question and you want to know how to do something. But they have this training module. And this training area is actually pretty darn good. There is they will take you through all of the different basics of using Google Docs, just like we're doing here right now, about their cheat sheets for like keyboard shortcuts, templates, productivity guides, tips, and they've got it all laid out here. Now, they don't do it, as I say, they don't do a very good job of promoting the fact that they have these support documents, but if you are wanting to really up your productivity as far as using Google Docs, spending a little bit of time in the Google Workspace Help or Learning Center is well worth your time. And any questions you have that I haven't covered here, this is the place you should go to get those answers. Let's spend a moment here and talk about creating documents from scratch and beginning your documents. So whenever you are inside of Google Drive, and I'll just start a new window here and I'll just open Google Drive itself. When you're in Google Drive, you can create a new document under the New menu by clicking New and then choosing Google Docs. You have a drop-down menu here that allows you to create it from a blank document or from a template. Now, as is with most things with Google, this is just one way of creating a new document. If you're in a Google Doc already, you can always create a new document from the File menu as well. But this is if you're creating a new document from scratch from Drive. And of course, an important consideration is your document, when you create it, is going to be stored inside of Google Drive. So you've got this cloud-based storage of your document for your organizational system. If you create a blank document, it's just going to be a blank document. But the templates that they have available to us that are included in the template gallery really can give you a good start on a lot of different documents. Now here, in a lot of cases, we're kind of going back to that print-based world where you're setting up newsletters or promotional pieces. But these will give you some nice ideas of fonts and layout to help you structure your documents a little bit more effectively if you're doing more elaborate documents. But increasingly, I think most of us are just using the word processor for the straight up writing features in the word processor. And we're worried about formatting and doing the kind of the fancier layout when we are in our final delivery phase. Like if we're creating a web page, we'll be doing that in our web page layout tool as opposed to doing that inside of Google Docs. So how we create our documents and how we write our documents now, probably more often than not, the tools that we're most interested in using are the writing tools, things like grammar check and spell check, which is all built in. But writing itself has changed. The process of writing. Of course, you can always write by a keyboard. There's no question that keyboard writing is still going to be the number one way that we write. But, oh my, Google has done such a good job. And I think you are going to increasingly see this option or start to use this option as a way of writing, at least if you're like me. And a lot of people haven't played with this yet. We released a video on this a little while ago. But if you go under the Tools menu while you have your cursor in any document, if you go under the Tools menu, you've got this option here, which is voice typing. And voice typing is I call it a game changer in the video that I just released on it, because it is different than just dictation. And here's what you need to understand entering text by voice inside of Google Docs, as opposed to the sort of dictation we do on our smartphone with Siri or with Google on the smartphone, where we do straight up dictation. Normally, within the Apple world or within the Windows world, when you do dictation, you start a dictation session, the computer starts listening to you, and whatever you say during that, while it's listening, it puts down, and it does a very good job of putting it down. But then as soon as you try and interact with that text, if you were to try and highlight something and make it bold or correct something or change the insertion point, it kicks you out of dictation and you go back into normal editing mode. The difference with voice typing is you remain in editing mode and your keyboard and mouse remain active while you are undergoing dictation, while you are dictating into the computer. And that is a game changer because you can then interactively compose your documents. I get excited about this because this, for a lot of people, is going to be a huge productivity boost. And it also helps overcome a lot of limitations that many of us have, especially if you're starting to get a little bit older and your typing skills are not as good, or you've got arthritis, or you've got any issues with input. This helps overcome that in a dramatic way. Allow me to show you. When we enable dictation, it starts to listen for exactly what we're saying, and it converts our voice into text, period. We add punctuation that's required, comma, and we can continue to dictate as long as we have cognitive thought, I imagine, exclamation mark. New line. What is different is I can interactively make changes to the copy with my keyboard and mouse while I am dictating. Conscious. Do you see what happened there? I changed the word cognitive to conscious because I thought it might be a better fit. And I was able to not exit the editing session, but I was able to continue on. If I want to move the cursor and start typing back in an earlier place, I can do that as well, period. New line. Do you see here I have inserted a new paragraph above one of the earlier paragraphs? Now you saw some of the limitations. It heard the word paragraph and it put in the paragraph marker. So it's not 100% perfect yet, and you will learn how to avoid some of those kind of traps. But the interactive nature of being able to go through the keyboard and mouse, correct words that it hears wrong, or even do basic formatting while you're working on a document and you're dictating into the document, to me is an absolute game changer as far as how we end up using our word processor and entering copy into it. Now, interestingly, we are seeing the same features being added by Apple in the new version of Siri dictation in the newest version of iOS. So I imagine we're going to see these capabilities built into our operating systems in the not too distant future. But for now, the only way that you can do this is using Google Docs inside of Chrome on the desktop. This doesn't work in Google Docs on your smartphone or Google Docs on a tablet. It doesn't work in other browsers other than Chrome. It only works inside of Chrome. And I've got a video which I will share with you, which has been a very popular video where I go through the entire process for you if you're interested in learning more on it. So that's the kind of one of the other big changes with Google Docs, other than I think the new layout going from print to recognizing that it's a digital layout, but also now starting to think about new options we have for inputting information into our documents. That is really going to change philosophically the way a lot of us approach word processing. Now I want to talk about formatting the document. I've only done some basic paragraph type formatting as we entered copy into this particular document, but I want to talk about formatting and styles. And maybe it's just me, but I think a lot of people get confused between formatting a document and the styles that we apply to text inside of the document, because because formatting happens with styles, but styles doesn't happen with formatting. What the hell are you talking about, Steve? Let me go in and show you. Here we've got inside of this document, we have our, everything is just body copy. We haven't made anything bold or italic. We haven't identified anything special with any of the text in it other than carriage returns making different paragraphs. Here under the format menu, we can go in and we can adjust the font, and we can adjust the boldness and the size and the numbering styles and the line spacing of all of our paragraphs, and we can clean up the document to look really nice, and we can do all sorts of formatting. But when we format any one piece of text or any one line or any one paragraph in the document, the formatting is contained to that one piece of text that we're working with. So it's very much an instance by instance way of laying out a document. With longer form documents, you have some styles that you want to do. We used to call them style sheets inside of word processors, and that's where we can choose a style of font and a type size and a spacing between the letters, and we can apply that to one paragraph, and then we can duplicate that formatting automatically to all of the other paragraphs inside of the document. And we do that under the style menu. And the style menu we find here inside of Google Docs is right here. And these are the styles. We have normal text, titles, subtitles, and you can add more styles should you choose yourself. But these are the basic ones that we have. Now, a lot of people get confused and think that these styles are really only for formatting the text in the document, for making it look pretty. They are far more than that. Styles give our documents organizational structure. And when we're dealing with digital documents that are often going to be served and delivered in a digital form, an organizational structure inside of it replaces things like page numbers and chapters and tables of content in order for us to be able to navigate through the documents, both while we're in the creation process and later on in the consumption process. So let me walk through what we can do inside of the style menu, because I think it's for most of us, if we can master this process, we become far more efficient in the creation management of documents, of our own process of creating a document, because we are in far more control and we're not spending as much time, A, going around and modifying things, and B, we can immediately find what it is we're looking for. And I'll give you a good example of this in a moment, but let's just walk through what happens. This is my basic font that I like to use. When I'm typing, I like a slightly larger font, and I like to use Calabria 16 as my body copy. So I have set it here inside of the style menu as my body copy. I think when you initially open Google Docs, let's just open a new document and see. I think Google Docs, there's format, I always change it. So I'm going to create a brand new document. And when I create a new document, if we go under, it's Arial 11 points. It's very small. You see that? I don't like having my text that small on screen. So the very first thing I do when I create any new document is I go in and I change the font to Calabria, and I change the size to 16 points. And then I do something which is very important. I go under the style menu, I go under here and I say, update normal text to match. So now all of the text inside of, anytime I'm typing normally inside of the document, it will always be this font. So you can see that you can determine exactly what goes into the format of the document yourself right away, just as you start to create it. Now, the other formats that we have here that are presets include titles, subtitles, and headings. Now, the titles, again, are going to be pre-designed. They're going to be a larger, bolder font, as you can imagine. And when I choose it here, we see it's Calabria 26 point. And so it's, again, I could change that. I could make all of my titles in a document. Actually, let's add a second title here. We'll add it right there. We'll add this one here as a second title. We'll format it as title. Now we've got two titles, but let's just change that for argument's sake. And let's make it, instead of Calabria, let's make it Impact. It's going to look really ugly, but you see that I've changed this to Impact. When I go under the title menu now, and I say update title to match, now the second title, and anytime we use title in the document, it will be formatted this way. So this is the reason some people think that the formatting menu or the style menu is designed to help you format the document consistently, because it will give you this consistent control over the fonts and the look. But the style menu is so much more than just formatting the fonts. It's also, we used to call them style sheets, and it allows us to organize the document in different ways. So we see here that when I created these headlines, that we've got new text here inside of the outline, which starts to lay out all of the different titles that we have inside of the document. And if we take another part of the document and we highlight it and we make it a heading, it is then put in at a slightly different importance level as a heading. And actually there's a carriage return between those two. So there we go. So that is one. So that's a a subheading. So structurally, we're changing the organization of a document. And as you go through and you add any headings, you can go through and you can add more headings, make this heading. It gives the document a lot of structure. And when we start putting in things like, let's make headings down here. So let's make each one of these headings. So this is something important. We're going to make a title. Why this is important. So this is just some sample text. Heading. This is also a heading, and everything else is body copy. But you see what's happening is we're building almost like a table of contents, and this can actually become a table of contents here in the sidebar. So later on, when we are editing this or somebody is working on the document, they can jump to the point in the document that they want to work on or look at without scrolling up and down and looking on the document. Because if we're up here and I want to work on this part of the document, I just click here and it takes me right down to that location. Again, if I want to change any of the formatting, if I want to change how it looks, I have control over that. But this is an important navigational tool and productivity tool. We've got a document here, which is almost like a living, breathing document. This is a document that April and I and Pressy all use for all of our events, for Webinar Wednesday, for Foundational Friday, for any events that we put on, and for information that we need for our newsletter. So this is one master document that we have that contains all of the little details of all of our events. And you can see here that it's all done with titles, week of June 12th. If you go to the week of June 12th, you see inside of this document, all of these, Webinar Wednesday, all of the details of Webinar Wednesday, of Foundational Friday. And so if you open this document up, and we hide things as we go along, but it could be pages and pages long, but you can just go through the outline. If you need information of what's happening in the week of June 19th, here's the webinar we're in right now. If April needs a link to the archive page or the description, she just goes to week of June 19th, Webinar Wednesday, or if we want to get the information for Foundational Friday, we click there. So navigating the document, whether it's you that's created it or you're sharing with somebody else, becomes so much easier, and we have so much more organizational structure through the use of the style menu. I think mastering styles, once you understand the style menu and you start using styles to help you create your documents, you are well on the way. You're 80% of the way there as far as mastering what Google Docs is all about, because you can now create documents that look the way you want and all have organizational structure that can be carried through the document. You can take this entire outline, and you can later on export it as an outline to share with somebody else, or even export it as a table of contents if you're ultimately going to be publishing the document. Really important as far as navigation, and these styles will also carry through into websites as far as being H1 and H2 headers and structural information inside of web documents. So mastering styles, in my mind, is one of the most important basic things you can do as far as mastering Google Docs. I realize I took a little bit longer showing you voice typing and the styles and mastering styles inside of Google Docs than I probably anticipated in order to give you a good overview tutorial. But most of the other stuff you'll be able to figure out yourself in Google Docs. Spending a little bit of time poking around and understanding some of the features and looking at what each menu offers is a good exercise, and one which is well worth your time. I want to point out a few extra things before we wrap it up. First is, this is the biggest lifesaver that you can ask for. And often with your kids, this will be a big issue. If you go under the file menu, you can find something called version history. Sometimes this happens because it's a web-based document and it automatically continues to save. So if the kids make a bunch of changes and then realize that they didn't want those changes, or they've accidentally made changes and then they can't get back to the original version, it can seem like a disaster. Whole documents can appear to disappear. And I've had that with my kids when they're doing their schoolwork in Google Docs. They come teary-eyed, I wrote a whole report, now it's gone and I can't find it. I didn't save it, Dad, I'm terrible. No, go under version history. See the version history for any one document, and you can see all of the different times that document was changed and all of the different autosaves. So you can always go back and find an earlier version of the document they're working on. Lifesaver. This will make you a hero, recognizing that nothing is ever lost inside of a program like Google Docs. That is number one, the history, which is, as I say, something which you can become a real lifesaver with. The other thing that I wanted to talk briefly about, which would be really remiss if we didn't, is to make sure we touch on the power of Google Docs as a sharing and collaboration tool. This, to my mind, is, I think, the biggest change in the way that we create documents over our old days of word processors, when we would sometimes have a file and would use SneakerNet to give it to somebody else to let them edit it and look at it and come back. The dynamic online sharing of a document is such a powerful feature inside of Google Docs, and you should try it and you should get comfortable with it. Even if it's just editing your kids' papers and helping them with their schoolwork, knowing what format you're in and what sort of a system you're employing as far as editing and collaborating on a document is really important. The share menu will give you permission to share with others, and then you can choose here in the editing and the suggesting menu where you can choose suggesting instead of editing. So now if I make any changes here, you see that it has offered it as a suggestion, and it will allow the person who owns the document to decide whether or not they want to accept the change by clicking accept or reject the change, so that you can see exactly what has been changed or offered. Now you can do this through actually editing the document, and you can also offer comments in this sidebar here on the right hand side within a document as you're working through and collaboratively working on a document. That's a little bit more advanced way of using Google Docs, but it is very nice. And I think it's great if you start to teach your kids, especially if you have the opportunity to work with your kids or your grandkids on their homework and their documents, if you get them comfortable with the collaborative editing experience, which will serve them well through the rest of their lives. So the collaboration features in Google Docs are another really one of kind of the baseline things that one needs to understand. And finally, let's talk briefly about the printing and the output. I got to say, one of the things that Google Docs has never been great with, as good as, say, Microsoft Word, is printing. It does an okay job of printing, but it doesn't do a great job of printing and formatting the documents with every printer. And that's due to the web nature of the web drivers and all of that sort of stuff. But one of the things that we can always do with a Google Doc is you can take it and you can output it as a PDF, which means that it'll create a PDF document for sharing. And when we're talking about this pageless metaphor of creating the documents this way, then the PDF is a great way of sharing documents digitally without having to print them out. So you've got the option of sending it to a printer if you still have a printer, or using the print menu to create PDF documents that you can then share with others. And really, that's the basis of getting started with Google Docs. You know, I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you how to format a paragraph. I think that's something that we can all figure out. Philosophically, understanding where a program has come from, how word processors have evolved from word processing for pages through to digital documents, seeing how those tools fit and seeing new input options, new ways of using voice typing for perhaps looking at new options for creating content. I think that's a far more useful use of our time today as we look at the basis of getting started with Google Docs. And then secondly, understanding that structure. Understanding how the style menu can give us total control over the structure of a document and give us all, and just basically save us time and energy downstream through the life of a document. If you master those two things, you are in great shape as far as understanding and taking advantage of Google Docs. And I bet you that you spend more time inside of Google Docs and you spend more time experimenting with the other menus because there's something that you want to do, and then you'll very quickly discover how to do it because of all of the features built in. And of course, their lessons and their help menu will help you along the way as well.